I'm talking today about, what historians do professionally, what we do in terms of our research. And so I'm going to use that question up there at the top, serving as the title, Why No Respect for Godzilla, as a sort of entree to discuss my research. So first of all, I'll talk about why I thought to ask that question in the first place. Then I'll get into how I tried to come up with an answer for the question. And then finally, of course, what answer I came up with to solve that question. So some students, though, hearing me talk about history research, may be wondering, well, what more can you research in history? I mean, we know what happens in the past. We know when it happened. What more is there to know? Well, yes, it's true. We do know all the sort of big events of history and know when they took place, for sure, definitely. All of that is rather cut and dry. But if you say that you can fully understand the past by just looking at a timeline sort of version of history, that's kind of the same thing as saying if you read a plot synopsis of a movie or a book, it's the same thing as experiencing that movie or that book. Because there is so much more going on in the past besides just that series of events. So that synopsis or that timeline might give you the most important highlights, but there's still a ton of stuff beyond that that's worth exploring. So when historians often do their research and explore this larger picture, there's kind of often two things that we try to accomplish. First of all, these things that we know what and when they happened, we try to find out as well how and why they happened. So historians will often ask questions like, what was a powerful person's motive in making a very important and influential decision? Or what was the biggest contributing factor to some event that affected thousands of people's lives? And of course, unlike saying what date something happened on, this is not cut and dry. There are multiple answers to these questions. People can debate them, and historians do debate them endlessly. So it's probing, these how and why questions, getting deeper answers is one way, we can expand something left to research in history. And then another thing historians try to do with their research is to uncover stories from the past that have not yet been told. So kind of looking beyond famous people, seeing what happened on a date that wasn't important, a date that did not live in infamy. Just regular folks in their everyday lives give us a bigger picture, a broader sense of what was going on in the past. And really, if you think about it, we are all part of history. Everybody in this room, we are alive today. We are making up this time period. And some historian, 100 years from now, could take the story and the experience and the lives of any one of us and use us as a key to kind of figure out what was going on in America in the 20-teens, or whatever we're going to call this decade. So really, no person's story is totally insignificant, looked at from this historical perspective where we are trying to see the big picture of the past. And often what will happen too when we try to tell these untold stories of people who we haven't really focused on before, we do get this new perspective often that will then help with issue number one. That will help us answer those how and why questions in a different way, find new motivations, new causes that we hadn't before. And so the best historical research will really try to do both of these things. Tell an untold story that changes our version of how or why things happen as they do. So that basically is, the essence of what historical research is. But now getting to my research in particular, my specific question, first of all here, why no respect for Godzilla? Now, I have to ask, I don't know if anybody noticed, there's a sort of flaw in this whole title. If we take both sections of it, why no respect for Godzilla, researching the history of American popular culture. And does anyone see anything wrong with that juxtaposition? Yeah? Yes, exactly. Godzilla is not American. Godzilla is Japanese. So my project here, my question that it stems from, is going to span both the US and Japan. It's going to be what we would call a transnational project, which is a good word to know if you're a historian. You can put it in grant proposals and people will give you money because transnationalism is sort of a hot topic right now. So the historical event, the big thing we kind of know about that I started with here is in particular the relationship between US and Japan on the heels of World War II. And why this is so interesting is because you have two nations that were basically trying to destroy each other for 4 years during World War II. Right after the war, become allies incredibly quickly. So you kind of go of images of Japan like this. You know, this is wartime propaganda. Americans were thinking very, very nasty things about Japan and its people at the time. And then a couple years after the war is over, this is how Japan looks to Americans, or this beautiful land of cherry blossoms that you would perhaps want to go visit someday. So this idea of enemy to ally, war to peace happens in a really short amount of time. It's basically within a year of Japan's surrender, the two nations have become allies. So this is, a fact that we know happened. Japan and the US become allies very quickly. So there are other historians out there who are answering the question, trying to figure out why at sort of a level of policymakers, the guys at the top who make decisions, the diplomats. So they try to figure out, well, why does the State Department decide Japan is going to have to be our ally so quickly? The short answer to that is basically the Cold War. The US wants an ally in Asia. But I sort of built off of those people, those historians, and what they found already, and kind of brought my own question to bear, which is, well, how did this change? If it happened so quickly, how was this sold to the American public, this switch from enemy to ally? Because the United States is a democracy, which means that our leaders can't do anything totally crazy without the public's consent, or else they'll get voted out of office. And also Americans, we actually are smart people, besides what some situations would indicate, and we do have memories longer than fruit flies. So how is it that Americans sort of buy this image of Japan as ally so quickly after we were trying to kill them all? So my hypothesis on how this could work out is basically that popular culture at the time, that is the post-war era, which I'm sort of kind of looking at the late 1940s, but more so the 1950s. During that point in time, popular culture embraced Japan and put forward this new pleasant image, as you see here, of Japan and its culture that helped Americans essentially digest this change. And then in doing my preliminary research for what was going to become my dissertation and then later my book project, what I found is that this was most often the case, that almost all discussions of Japanese culture in the 1950s were very positive, with one massive exception, and that, of course, was Godzilla. So here is what movie critics were saying about Godzilla at the time of the film's release in the United States in 1956. The New York Times called it an incredibly awful film, featuring a miniature of a dinosaur made of gumshoes and about $20 worth of toy buildings and electric trains. And Newsweek referred to Godzilla as a 400-foot-high plucked chicken who cannot act his way out of a paper bag. So critics were not kind to this movie. And also the reason I have only 2 review quotes up here is because that's about all I could find. Most critics didn't even think that the movie was worth mentioning at all in their movie reviews. So Godzilla at the time was largely ignored, and when it was paid attention to, it was belittled and dismissed. So this, leads to the question, if Japanese culture is, revered and respected for the most part during this time period, why then no love for Godzilla? So that is, how I got to the question. So then the next issue is, well, how did I answer that question? And historians generally, how we answer questions is by hitting the archives. And archives are collections of records, usually very meticulous collections of records with lots and lots and lots of pieces of paper, almost anything that could possibly be included. And the types of organizations that keep records, well, federal, state, and local governments will usually have archives of all their papers. Also, a lot of nonprofit organizations have archives, and some large corporations as well will have them, although there's some question as to how open they will make them to the public. And in addition to institutions, a lot of famous people will hold on to their letters, correspondence, diaries, and other personal papers. And upon their death, they will leave them to a library somewhere to maintain. So you can often look into the lives of prominent politicians, and other influential people as well. So what historians, typically do to answer our questions is to go through these archives, pour through these records, mounds of paper with all this information, and from these little bits of information, we can piece together larger pictures and try to get answers to our historical questions. And of course, archives are always useful, but particularly useful. If you're especially lucky, you will find some archive or some set of records that nobody has looked at before, and that's a way to find one of these new stories that you can tell that have never been told previously. Now, in my specific case, since I'm researching popular culture, archives were not necessarily my primary place to go to find answers. Since I'm looking at the media, essentially, the place I went is the media of the time. So I basically tracked down and created a small mountain of newspaper and magazine articles that were published on Japanese culture. I read way more how-to books and guidebooks on things like bonsai and flower arranging and rock gardening than I thought I ever would. I also got to watch some really cheesy movies and call it research, so that was kind of fun too. But I did do my share of archival research as well. I did visit some archives from institutions that promoted Japanese culture in the 1950s, and from them, figured out how and why, what messages were they giving to the American public. So these institutions included places like the Museum of Modern Art in New York and the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, both of which had displays of Japanese items. Also, there were cultural organizations at the time whose sole purpose was basically promoting Japanese culture to Americans. So these included groups like the U.S.-Japan Society, Ikebana International, Ikebana being a type of flower arranging, and the first Zen Institute, which had locations in both New York and Kyoto, both of which I went to as part of my research. And some of these were kind of interesting to visit because not all of them actually thought of themselves as historical archives before I got there. And they're sometimes asking, who are you? What do you want? Why are you interested in us? But in the end, let me take a look at some of their old correspondence and get some ideas about what they were up to back in the 1950s. And also, finally, since the 1950s were not that long ago, I was actually also able to talk to some people face-to-face who had lived through a part of this and get their stories as well, kind of a personal take on what was going on. So this is, kind of how I set about doing my research, answering my questions. So after all of this, I did come up with not just one, but kind of two primary answers to my questions. So why no respect for Godzilla? First of all, because Godzilla did not really fit the mold of what Americans had come to expect of Japanese culture at the time. So all that other stuff they did respect, Godzilla wasn't quite part of that, so he was an outlier. And then secondly, perhaps more to the point, his movies lost a lot in translation and wound up looking a lot cheaper in the United States than they did over in Japan. So explain, both of these. So first of all, for Godzilla as a cultural misfit. Well, there were three things that were generally true of, actually I'll get to him here in a moment, three things that were generally true of Japanese culture in the 1950s. First of all, it was traditional. Secondly, it was elegant and subdued. And third, it was appreciated by wealthy, tasteful, influential people. And Godzilla was none of these things. And I'm guessing all of you have a sense of Godzilla, like who he is, but I don't know if all of you are familiar with the actual original movie that first showed up in America in 1956. So to give you a sense of that, I've provided the trailer for Godzilla. This takes about a minute to watch here, so I figure it'd be worthwhile to see. Here is what Godzilla was all about at that point in time.
Godzilla, king of the monsters, alive, surging up from the
this is awkward.
sea on a tidal wave of terror to wreak vengeance on mankind. Godzilla, king of the monsters, it's alive, a gigantic beast, stalking the earth, crushing all before it, in a psychotic cavalcade of electrifying horror, raging through the streets, a rampage of total destruction. Godzilla, king of the monsters, incredible titan of terror, wiping out a city of 6 million in a holocaust of flame. Yet flames cannot destroy it. Bombs cannot kill it. All modern weapons fail. scientists of the world find a way to stop this creature? For the answer, see Godzilla, King of the Monsters. You may wish to deny it, but your eyes tell you it's true. A tale to stun the mind. More fantastic than any ever written by Jules Verne. More terrifying than any ever shown on the screen. Awesome. Incredible. Unbelievable. A story beyond your wildest dreams. Dynamic violence. Savage action. Spectacular thrill. Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Fantastic beyond comprehension. Gripping beyond compare. Astounding beyond belief. The mightiest monster of them all. See Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Okay. So what Japanese culture then looked like at this point in time, yeah, like I said, it was traditional and it was subdued. So it was things like flower arranging, like bonsai, you know, those little miniature trees. It was rock gardens. It was houses with walls made out of paper. It was Zen meditation. And the reason why a lot of this sort of traditional stuff was embraced so much by Americans, it kind of made sense with this whole thing about reconciling the United States and Japan, because Japan in the recent past, you know, contemporary Japan, basically had tried to kill us in the war. So if we're about reconciliation, you know, sort of healing the wounds of that war, it's probably best to stay away from contemporary Japan when you're promoting a Japanese culture. And instead, if you focus on the distant past, stuff that happened long time ago, all of that, yeah, it seems to be unrelated to the violent present. So that's one reason to stick with tradition over modern stuff. And Godzilla, of course, is not only takes place in the present, but is a modern medium of film. So there's a reason why Godzilla doesn't quite fit in. And then also, these Japanese traditions were often explained or characterized using this word, which I can now resort to. I think you might have a solution. Okay, all right, so David's going to try some stuff there. All right, so this term here, shabui, is how a lot of Americans started explaining Japanese culture. Now, has anybody here ever seen this word before besides my husband? Okay, so no, because we don't really use this term anymore. It's not really a part of the American vocabulary. But in the 1950s, it was tossed around with enough frequency that it actually was the brand name of women's underwear, which I had a great illustration for that ad where I found the word shabui. Yeah, it was often used to describe Japanese culture. And what it basically translates into is beauty in simplicity. So it's a certain kind of aesthetic that is very subdued, rather minimalist, rather austere, kind of, yeah, clean lines, not a lot of stuff going on. So it's not gaudy, it's not busy, there's not a lot of colors or patterns or anything like that. And how this sort of shabui notion of Japanese culture helped, again, this reconciliation between the US and Japan is that, yeah, if we want to accept Japan, it helps to forget the wartime image. You promote a subdued, calm, serene, Zen meditation type of Japan. So Godzilla, of course, being loud and brash and everything else, does not fit this nice, elegant, subdued image of Japan. So again, he's an outlier in this sense. And then the third thing I mentioned is that being so elegant and subdued and minimalist, Japanese culture was also often appreciated by middle class or upper middle class people who were wealthy, fashionable, urban, and urbane. And this is because, you know, they considered shabui stuff to be rather tasteful, because there was an understanding at this point in time that it was only people in the working class who liked stuff that had busy patterns and loud colors and unnecessary ornament and, you know, lots of decoration going on. So Japanese culture is sort of associated with the upper middle class and the wealthy in this country. Now, Godzilla, by contrast, is mostly going to be screened in drive-in movie theaters. And these are places where these wealthy Japan shabui enthusiasts are not going to go. So even if Godzilla, for some reason, was, more subdued and more traditional, the kind of people who were really into Japanese culture at this point in time probably never would have seen the movie because they wouldn't set foot in a drive-in. And this actually brings me to sort of my next issue here. That is Godzilla, what he lost in translation, the movie itself, Godzilla kind of as a B movie, which is what he became. And these drive-ins, where the movie wound up getting shown most typically, well, first of all, foreign movies in general. In the 1950s, kind of as today, they were not shown in your regular first-run, well, today be multiplex, but just, regular theaters did not show foreign movies. Foreign movies either went to an art house, sort of a small independent theater, or they were shown at the drive-in. And of course, Godzilla wound up at the latter. And drive-ins have a pretty bad reputation now, and they kind of did back then. Usually they were known as places where teenagers would go with their dates and make out in the back seat instead of watching the movie, like passion pits, they were sometimes called. Now in actuality, studies show that the majority of people going to drive-ins in the 1950s were actually families with kids, so they could go see a movie without having to worry about a babysitter, but they still had these reputations as these sort of low-class places. And most drive-ins, actually, most of the movies they showed, well, they couldn't afford regular first-run movies because drive-ins didn't have a lot of money and it was very expensive to rent those from the studios. So they would often do kind of like the movie theater in Sumner. They would show, second-run movies most of the time, but then they also, especially on weekends, would sort of fill out their bill with cheap movies as well, these B movies. And the B movies were often meant to cater to their younger audience, those teenagers that were present that I mentioned. And by the mid-1950s, among these cheap B movies, a certain, there was the general genre of science fiction was very popular, and then also this subgenre in particular of giant mutated things that destroyed civilization. There was one, The Beast from 50,000 or 20,000 fathoms, about a dinosaur going after New York. There's one called Them, where giant ants attack Arizona. So basically quite a few movies popular in the United States at a time when people were worried about the A-bomb and nuclear radiation with these giant radioactive monsters. Now, meanwhile, in Japan, Toho Studios is creating its own giant radioactive monster on the other side of the Pacific. But the thing with Godzilla and the way it is received in Japan is that Godzilla is really a blockbuster over there. Godzilla is not a B movie, and this is an important thing to know. I mean, it wasn't like Godzilla was necessarily a prestige movie, but a lot of people went to see it. It was hugely popular. It made a ton of money for the studios. So Godzilla in its own context, I would say, was maybe more like the Avengers than like Sharknado. And it was the latter that it was treated as when it got to the United States. But in Japan, the original form, the studios hired top talent, famous actors that Japanese audiences would have recognized. And also the movie had some of the most expensive visual special effects that were available in Japan at the time. And the script writing, the theme of the movie, was very dark and very serious. And it had this really strong critique of nuclear proliferation. Of course, first of all, in the monster of Godzilla himself, he is awoken by nuclear testing. But also within the plot of the movie, it turns out the only weapon that can defeat Godzilla is this weapon that is as powerful as the atomic bomb. And if they use it on Godzilla, they'll unleash it on the world. And so it's this huge moral quandary that the heroes have to face. So really, originally in its original form, Godzilla, had a very deep, critical, analytical side. It was more to it than just Monster Stomps Tokyo. But when American distributors get a hold of this movie and screen it in the United States, they're not really interested in this movie as art or political commentary. They are most interested in selling it to drive-ins and having teenagers come watch it. So they basically translate this movie in some ways with about as much care as they would any other science fiction drive-in movie. Now, first of all, in translating there is the problem of literal translation. That is, Godzilla's in Japanese, you got to get it into English somehow. And the option of subtitles was basically ruled out right away. Distributors assumed the kind of people who go to drive-ins aren't going to want to read a movie. So they knew they were going to have to use dubbing instead. But actually, the producers of Godzilla, the American version, came up with a creative solution. They actually shot a bunch of scenes themselves in Hollywood. They got actor Raymond Burr, before he became Perry Mason, to play this U.S. correspondent in Tokyo. So he talks with all these Japanese people who sort of fill him in on what's going on with Godzilla. And in that way, you don't have a lot of conversation in Japanese that doesn't get explained to Raymond Burr. So there's very little dubbing in that movie. But subsequent Godzilla films, they did not invest this kind of time and energy, and the entire movies wind up being dubbed. And in dubbing, a lot of times studios are going to use cut-rate actors to do this. Some of them will go on to become famous, but famous as voice actors for cartoon shows. So like the guy who did the voice of Yogi Bear was in some of these, as was the guy who did the voice of Boris Badenov in Rocky and Bullwinkle. So sometimes they kind of sound a little cartoonish. Also George Takei, this was one of his early gigs as well, was doing some dubbing work on a Japanese movie. Yeah, you don't have the best actors usually. And then also in terms of translating scripts, American distributors would sometimes use people who didn't even speak Japanese because it'd be really expensive to hire folks like that. So they basically took some guys who had gotten a plot synopsis and said, you know, write what you think these people are talking about in this scene. So usually in those cases, the script was not top-notch. So you have, poor script and poorer actors with this dubbing technique that basically made the movie look a lot cheaper than it was originally. And the first Godzilla as well was also edited for content. Distributors wanted to take away that critique of nuclear proliferation because they figure drive-in patrons aren't going to like a movie that makes it look like America is being criticized or American foreign policy is being criticized. So they basically take out a lot of that criticism of the nuclear bomb. There's also in particular one scene of a mother and her child who a building is about to fall on, and the mom says to her kid, "Oh, don't worry, we will soon be with father." That was taken out of the American version because A, that was just way too dark for sort of a popcorn movie in a drive-in. And secondly, you have to realize that, father probably died in the recent war trying to kill American soldiers. So we definitely can't have that in there. So when the movie is edited for content as well, what we're basically left with is instead of this film that makes this comment on nuclear proliferation, essentially a action movie that they keep in all the shots of Godzilla breaking stuff and destroying stuff, but take out any of the larger social message. So in the end, what began as sort of like this middling popcorn movie in Japan, in some ways kind of like Godzilla was here in the United States last summer, by the time it gets to the United States, it basically looks like a junk movie. It looks like trash culture, and that is how critics treat it. So basically, that is probably the most direct answer to the question, why no respect for Godzilla? Because the movie loses a lot of quality when it comes to the United States. But of course, we can't cry too much for Godzilla because even if critics didn't like him at first, he goes on to have a very long and lucrative career in the United States, finding legions of fans, and not just in the drive-in, but also on late-night television. In 1980, a CBS News poll found that Godzilla was the third most recognized Japanese person in America. So we knew him more than anybody else. Also, I think, these days, if you stick the suffix "zilla" on the end of something, people know exactly what you're talking about, whereas who knows the word shabui anymore? Basically nobody. So Godzilla kind of won out over that old understanding of Japanese culture that was popular in the 50s. And of course, there's countless figurines and merchandise that have been related to Godzilla over the years. At one point, he actually had his own American cartoon show, originally produced in English. He's also made guest appearances on Saturday Night Live, The Simpsons, Chappelle's Show, and South Park. And he's had endorsement deals for companies like Dr. Pepper, Subway, and Nike, where he faced off in a dunk competition against Charles Barkley. And if this was working, I would show you that dunk competition, and I feel very frustrated that I can't. But essentially, Godzilla has become an international icon over time, has legions of fans now, despite his initially cold reception. So Godzilla will be just fine, even though he had no respect back in 1956.